You are listening to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida.
Hello and welcome to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast. My name is Tom Augustinger. I'm your host, and this is my host, Kelly Allen. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Tom. On the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, we explore how we as Jesus followers can connect the dots between education, contemporary culture, and biblical theology, and live like Jesus in this broken and challenging world. And I am so excited today because we are going to be talking about one of many events that we're having here at King's Crossing. This is where we're recording now. But our last event was a really great one. All events are great, but this last one, we have some key takeaways that we want to share.
Absolutely.
With everybody. And, what it was an FDLE cybersecurity event. So we had two FDLE officers that specialize in cybersecurity.
That's right.
Come here and talk to parents about how we can protect our children, our teens, from everything that's online.
It was a good audience, too. I mean, a lot of good questions came out of that. And I think there were really some powerful takeaways. So what were some of your takeaways? Yeah.
So I wrote a few down. Some of them... Actually, everything that I'm going to share, I haven't really thought about before. There were some aspects of it that we talked about that we need to have another one of these because, like me as your average parent, I don't know how to protect my Wi-Fi router from, outside influences.
Change the password or whatever, right?
Yeah. So that was something that I hadn't thought about, and my husband's going to laugh at me because he takes care of all this stuff, but I didn't know that you had to change the stock passwords on your Wi-Fi router.
Because and I don't even know if you need to do that. I heard somebody tell me that maybe that isn't even true. It isn't true nowadays. But regardless, the whole idea that there's this whole other layer of stuff that you have to be concerned about.
Yeah, for sure. And don't go to Starbucks and do your banking on the public Wi-Fi.
That was one of my favorite things. Don't go to Starbucks and do your banking.
Yeah.
Never thought of doing that, but maybe somebody
not
does.
Not something I struggle with doing anyway, but it's stuff I never thought about because, people, there's a lot of threats out there that can come onto your computer. Another one is make sure your devices are updated to the latest versions. So I never thought about that. So these are just real practical takeaways. They went into a little bit about the dark web.
Yeah, that was interesting and somewhat scary all at the same time.
Exactly. And they said in general, your kid's not going to be exposed to the dark web unless they're looking for it. And so if you have a kid that you're concerned about might be looking for stuff like that, see if they've checked out .onion websites instead of .org or .com.
Yep, yeah, exactly. And I think it was a good a good question a parent asked, and that was, can my kid get to the dark web from YouTube? And their short answer was no. Right. You can't do that.
Yeah. So it's not something that, if you don't have a child who's struggling in that way, trying to find something that your kids aren't going to stumble on that.
Right. Absolutely.
So that was interesting, but something that I did have to talk to my daughter about, after this event was filling out the online quizzes.
Oh, right.
What Disney princess are you?
Yep,
and stuff like that. Well, they're just getting all your information, possibly who knows who's putting out these quizzes.
Right.
And they might, be figuring out passwords or from the information that you're giving them. So that's something I had never thought about.
No, I really didn't think about that very much either.
Yeah.
It's been interesting because again, just because of the age bracket I'm in, our kids were at the beginning of all of this. The whole quiz thing was not a big deal.
Right.
But now it's like a thing.
It is.
Kids love doing that.
Yes. When I was talking to my daughter, she's like, Mom, I've been filling those out. She's in 9th grade now. She's like, I've been filling those out since 6th grade. And I'm like, seriously? It's like I knew it, but I never thought anything of it.
Right. Yeah. One of my takeaways was a reminder that there's a sense in which that the internet, there's a sense in which that personal technology is not neutral. I mean, obviously the device itself, without any, it is neutral, it's just a device. But because of what's being put into the device and the amount of selling that's going on through the device, really in functional ways, it's not neutral.
Yeah.
And so therefore our kids, it's an active attempt to get our kids engaged.
Yes.
And it's not like anybody's pretending that's not the case, because that is the case. And a lot of it, as they pointed out, is not necessarily a nefarious, group of people in a room somewhere going, we're going to take over America necessarily, or we want all the kids. It's really about money. Yeah. And they said that like a million times.
They did.
It's really about the money. And if they can get more customers at a younger age to get bought into their products, then they can stay there for a long time. So that was one of the key takeaways. So much is driven, unfortunately, by that.
Yeah, they do things to keep you on.
Yeah, for sure, and keep you engaged. Yeah, I think that's actually true. The other big takeaway I had was just watching people's reactions when certain things were, like, for example, the dark web and everything.
Yeah.
You can just almost feel how the tension and the anxiety in parents just increases, because the more you hear, the more you go, oh my God.
I know.
And with you, it was the quiz thing. Yeah. But then there's a lot of other things, that could be layered on it.
They gave us this really neat sheet. It said 20 apps parents should know. Yeah. And like all of the, all the ones that I thought I heard them all, but I didn't know that there was a calculator app that helps the kids hide like information that they don't want their parents to see, because their parents look at the app icon and they just think it's a calculator.
Like a calculator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just crazy, right? I know. So that's difficult.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I remember saying at the end of the event really was that through all of the stuff that we're talking about regarding emotional health, but regarding internet safety, all of those things, we have to remember that there's a certain sense in which God is not out of these pictures.
Right.
He's present.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean we shouldn't be vigilant and we shouldn't do the things we know to do. It just means that we shouldn't freak out.
Yes.
Because that doesn't really help. And I use that term intentionally, right? I mean, and not everybody's doing that, but there's so much anxiety. And for the parents that want to do it well, they're the ones that are freaked out. Because the other folks are going, what? Okay, whatever, Right. But I think most parents are good parents. That's been my experience for 40 years. Most parents are good parents. Most parents want the best for their kids. There may be disagreements about what that means or everything, but basically they want the best for their kids. And so when somebody starts saying to them, well, there are people that are out to get your kids. Is there anything you could say to a parent that would make them more unhappy or upset or whatever? Yeah. And so, so I just think we need to remember as we go through all of this stuff to keep pointing people back to the cross, back to Christ, back to the sufficiency of that, and back to the fact that if we help our kids grow in Christ, and we also help them protect themselves online, that's all important. Yeah. But the foundation matters. Yes, because if they have that biblical foundation, they're not going to be going in those, those places those rabbit holes in those places that they shouldn't go online. Yeah. Yeah. So this is my chance before we begin to transition to next week's event. This is my chance to advertise this fact, and that is, this may sound really weird to a lot of parents today, Christian parents included. This is my commercial for trying to make sure your kids understand basic theology. Who is God? Does he exist? Who is he? What is he like? What am I as a person? What does that mean? And how do I relate to God? And is the Bible really true? Is it all true? Is it partially true? It's up to us. This can't be fully delegated, in my view, to the church and to the Christian school. As dad, and I'm sure you would say as mom, it's partly our job to say, look, what is true? What is actually capital T true? And even though that flies in the face of a lot of stuff we're hearing. So I just want to do that commercial. Every once in a while, I'll say, look, guys, let's work together to try to make sure our kids are learning good doctrine so they can use discernment because they have the truth already embedded there. Yes. Yeah. Because CCS is doing its best to do that. We're certainly doing our best. Most churches are doing their best to do that. And some families are. But look, we need all the help we can get. The old three-legged stool concept, church, home, and school.
Yeah.
You need all three legs. It's not 2 out of the 3 or whatever. So, yeah, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about next week. Really cool event. First time thing for us.
Yes, it really is. We have a lot going on next week. It's going to be in the evening. We're going to have an event here at King's Crossing, but it's also going to be our podcast next week, which I'm really excited. Yeah, so it's Emotional Health in Kids event. But I want to say, we say emotional health in kids, it's kids and teens. I want our listeners to know that it's not just kids we're talking about. We're talking about teenagers as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of the stuff would apply to adults even too.
It really would.
So
It really would. So we'll have a panel discussion.
Yeah,
so
really cool.
We are inviting some really neat guests to talk with us. We're going to be asking them questions, and we're going to be asking for questions from the audience to ask them just to talk emotional health and wellness, basically. So we're going to have Mrs. Austin Vanderlinden. She's a Leon County social worker and therapist. Really excited to have her. She's been here before at CCS.
Done some training for us.
Done some training for us, so we're happy to have her back. We've had Dr. Nari Jeter, PhD and licensed marriage and family therapist on the podcast before, so she's going to be here next week as well.
Awesome. Good.
Yep, I'm really happy to have her. And then Dr. Richard Kieser, clinical psychologist in the Army.
U.S. Army.
U.S. Army.
U.S. Army, yeah.
Yes.
He's going to be zooming in.
He's going to zoom in.
From Fort Bragg, now called Fort Liberty.
Okay.
And so, it's a chance for our wonderful producer, Vance Rutherford, to work magic. And making sure all that stuff comes together and works.
We're relying heavily.
I know, right. We are. No pressure, Vance, wherever you are. No pressure. So that's right.
And then last but certainly not least, Miss Lorna Wolfkill. She's our assistant principal in secondary, and she does high school guidance.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is a great group of people, and what I love about this panel is not only their wealth of experience and knowledge and everything, but also that they kind of have different specialties. So I think it's going to give us a good broad perspective. Yeah. So you got Ms. Vanderlinden, that really is the kind of that person in the trenches, doing some family type therapy, that kind of thing as an LCSW. You've got Dr. Jeter, who also does family therapy, but then also has done a lot of work in the past with particularly with adolescent girls, which is a really cool perspective. Dr. Kieser, being a clinical psychologist, he does a lot of neuropsychologist type things in the Army, a lot of assessments and things, but he also does a lot of work with clinical counseling as well. And in his most recent past, he was kind of specialized in adolescent boys. And he was actually really, really good at that, and it's not easy. It's a tricky thing, and he's really, really good at it. And then Ms. Wolfkill is what we call, at CCS, we kind of call her the hallway person. She's the person that's going to be able to have that 2 or 3 minute conversation or 5 minute conversation and just be able to kind of like intervene in the moment.
She really does.
And that's a huge need because it kind of bridges the gap between these professionals and what they can get at school, and so she does a really great job with that. So it's a great group of people. Going to be a ton of fun. So one of the questions I think that people do ask about this, and I've had a couple of people ask this. Most people, they don't ask this, but some do. Why bother to talk about this? So what do you reckon some of the reasons are for you as a parent?
Honestly, I think about it from two ends. One as a parent, but also, working at the school. It really affects both areas. There's so many, we're in a different generation now. And so the tactics and techniques that we use, were used on us don't necessarily work. And so, just total understanding all around, but also, you might be asked, why is the school talking about this? Well, the school has to deal with it. That's actually a good point, right? So the more specific question is, why would a school be talking about emotional health? I think I've touched on this before, but my short answer to that is because we're whole people. Our minds, our brains are not separate from our bodies and our heart and our emotions. So therefore since we're holistic people, and that's the way that God sees us, the way He built us, that's integrated. You can't just talk about somebody's mind. That's a fallacy, actually. There are a lot of people who would say that in education, not so much anymore, but it used to be a big thing. It's like, we're just here to educate your mind. Well, that's like the beginning of the 20th century when Henry Ford said, we don't care about your life, all we care about is your hands.
the people on the assembly line.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work that way. We're whole human beings, and that caused a whole lot of problems for a lot of people because that was the perspective. So I think we need to be very careful to say, we're talking about this not because we are clinical psychologists,
right,
but or that we have all the answers. We do have a biblical viewpoint on things, and we work every day in the trenches with young people and their families.
Exactly.
And we are seeing it firsthand. And one of the ways we kind of check ourselves is we do surveys. And so I want to share a couple of things from our most recent survey. It's only been out for a couple days. So, if you have not already done it, then please go ahead and fill out the survey.
Yes.
But we have some interesting takeaways already from this survey. One of the questions was, we listed some topics around emotional health, challenges, and what are some of the things that you're seeing as a parent? So see if this kind of resonates with stuff that you have heard with your peer group. By far, the number one thing on that list, well, not by far, it's very close, but anxiety.
Yeah.
Whether it's specific anxiety over specific things or kind of that generalized anxiety.
Yeah.
Whatever the exact clinical term is for that. The second thing, the second highest response was self-esteem. Now, I want to pause there for a second.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because, the whole self-esteem movement, I think, originated most recently in the 70s, I think. This whole because I remember, because I was becoming an adult in the 70s, many, many moons ago. And so there was this whole push in the 70s and 80s for building self-esteem. And basically doing all these, I'm going to come back around to why I think this is fine. I'm not trying to criticize, I'm just saying, giving context. So the term self-esteem is really something that came to the fore in the 70s and 80s, really. And so that's where the whole positive, say positive affirmations to yourself, I am amazing and I am wonderful and those kind of things. Well, and that's still a thing in some camps, certain places on LinkedIn.
That reminds me of a Saturday Night Live skit.
Oh, does it really?
He's looking in the mirror and he's saying, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
Good, excellent. There you go. Right. And so, there's probably some truth to some of that. But a lot of studies have come out recently saying all of that really didn't work. It really didn't change anything. Right. And so I know what's meant here, and we're the one that phrased the question, so it's on us. But I think what they're really probably saying is there's identity issues there, I'm guessing. I'm thinking that's what when you talk about, well, the person's self-esteem is low. I mean, what does that mean to you? If somebody says, your daughter she doesn't, but what if they said you have low self-esteem? Right. I mean, I would think lacking confidence, to walk into a situation that I know that she's equipped for. Okay. Yeah. And then that probably at some level is a matter of training and how you guys have raised her. Right. And then also, maybe at some level, who she is, who she feels she is. Yeah. And can somebody else disturb that whole, who she is at a very deep level, I guess. I think there's part of it. So there's a couple other things on here worth mentioning. One of them was ADHD and or ADHD. Yeah. Still a huge issue. Almost 47% of people listed that. And then the rest of them were quite a bit less than those three. So really the biggest three were anxiety, self-esteem issues, and then ADD, and ADHD. Also, that was also interesting is, what kind of services would you access? Assuming there's some of these challenges going on, what would you access? I thought that was interesting. Yeah. And so by far, the vast majority was almost 63% saying in-person counseling. Virtual counseling came a distant second, which is especially interesting because I think you brought up in a previous podcast, Kelly, that that makes sense, right? Because somehow it just seems better to sit like this in person. Yeah. But the challenge is, there's not very many really good counselors. Right. In certain areas, there's almost none. And especially if you start talking about Christian counselors, the number gets even smaller. It really does. And so what do people do? It's probably one of the things we should ask our panelists next week. Yeah. Because this is not a small problem. It's a big problem. The second thing they brought up, interestingly, as far as what kind of services they would like, is podcasts. So what do you think about that? It's like 42% said podcasts. I think it's interesting. As a source of I think people are looking for information and easy bite-sized pizzas. And, they can listen to it while they drive and, I think it's convenience maybe. Well, I think so. It's probably part of it. After that comes books. which I was somewhat deeply gratified by. I don't know why. I guess because of my age. It's like, oh, people still want to read books.
They want to read.
This is a good thing, right? And then there were a bunch of other things on the list as well, but those are the ones that really stood out, really. The in-person counseling, podcasts, and then almost the same percentage was books along with podcasts. There was 38% for online resources. Another one actually worth mentioning, I see it now on the list, is templates.
Yeah, and handouts.
Yeah, and handouts. So what do you think they might mean by that? I think I know what we meant by saying it, but what do you as a parent, if we're going to give you a template or a handout?
Well, people want step-by-step instructions of how to get something done.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's the other thing, back to the thing last week, and then we got to be careful next week too. These subjects seem so huge.
Yeah.
They're so huge and they can be super overwhelming, not to mention stressful. And so therefore, we just have to be careful to make sure it is actionable. That was the great thing about the Screens and Teens book, I think, from last time. And not every book we do will be quite, because that was exceptionally practical.
It really was.
It's hard to find those that are really, really practical and actually still say something important. And it's not just a life hack. She does, I think Dr. Koch does a great job with that.
Yeah, she does.
And so maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of this book, since we're sitting here and we're talking about books and resources.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't know, are we doing a podcast on this one? Maybe.
I think so. I think maybe in 2 weeks, once we get through the panelist thing, maybe in 2 weeks we'll do that, in the 19th maybe. Yeah,
this book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and it's Haidt. I've been kind of diving into it, and I know that a lot of other parents have, and it's pretty popular book, #1 New York Times bestseller.
It is very popular. I'm hearing about it on various podcasts and everything. Yeah. I think I've skimmed through it. I haven't read it all in detail yet. I will before we talk about it, of course. But as I've skimmed through it, what I've seen is that he does a great job of framing the issue, which is always helpful. And he also does a really good job of saying, at the end of the day, this is what we should do. There's that takeaway part that's so important. And, frankly, a lot of it's, if I can say this, it's kind of old school. Yeah. People are recognized that some of the things that were done back in the day were good. Yes. Not everything was antiquated and out of date and terrible. Yeah. Some of it was actually good, and we've gotten away from it. And one of those things that he does talk about in here that I don't do a whole lot with my kids, but it's risky play. Oh, yeah. Tell me about that. So I think I know what that means. But. Well, it's like I'm always setting up, I think you've called me on the podcast before, a gatekeeper. And I am so a gatekeeper of my child. Like, I am not exposing them to risky situations. And that's not what he's saying to do. But allowing them, like, maybe the option to fail, right. To. Sure. Yeah. So, like my kids, like I'm very protective about them walking down the street to a friend's house. Yeah. Because you hear everything on the news. I don't want my child just to disappear because, right. But, even though honestly, what are the actual odds that would happen? Yeah. And it's not zero. Exactly. And therefore. It's not zero. It's not zero. And therefore, that's enough for me. It's right. Well, and there you go. Right. Yeah. So what's so interesting is I was just reading a biography of a well-known public figure, not a Christian necessarily, but it was very interesting. They're actually involved in the fashion industry. And they were talking about them growing up in the Bronx in the 60s. And they said that exact thing, that they lived in the city, and the city was the city. And their mom would send them out the door. Yeah. Beginning of the day. Yeah. And they'd walk all over the neighborhood. They'd skateboard. They would do whatever. They're all over the place all the time. Yeah. There was a lot of crime in New York City in the Bronx in the 60s. But the dots weren't connected in such a way that it would prevent his mom from letting him go out and play outside. And so, but you're saying, just as a modern parent. As a modern parent, so I'm either like walking with my child or I'm tracking my child in some way. A lot of kids nowadays have, and I'm going off on a rabbit hole, but a lot of kids nowadays have the watches where you can track them and see exactly where they are. The younger kids, the older kids have the phones you can track. It's so interesting, right? Because it's like, what? Yeah, and there's so many questions I can think of. We touched on this last spring, I think, but there's so many questions that come to mind. And first of all, I think the fact that you feel that way is fine. I mean, there's reasons why you feel that way.
Yeah. Well,
everybody has reasons.
The news.
The news. Right. So that gets into the question, and I go back to, so I'm just going to, if I can, for just a minute, play with that a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So the odds in many neighborhoods that our kids tend to live in, our kids being kids that tend to frequent community Christian school, generally speaking, are relatively safe neighborhoods.
Oh, yeah. I live in a great neighborhood.
Right. There's almost no crime, really. But since it's not zero, that still sends the message to the parent that I can't let you do this, because there's that potentially very small chance that something bad could happen.
Yeah.
So in the 60s, that parent, I grew up in the 60s.
Yeah.
My parents would say, "You'll be fine." So and I know you said you joked about saying the news, and I think you're right. What's the difference?
Do you think it's more information that I have than your parents did not have? I have access to all of these stories and all of these information.
Right.
All this information.
Maybe, right? And maybe because we now know if somebody sneezes in Tokyo.
Yeah,
I mean, essentially,
exactly.
right? I mean, so wherever it happens in the world, we know about it like this. And negative news sells.
Yeah.
So all I'm postulating, I'm not trying to really make any major statement here. I'm just simply saying, I wonder how much of those feelings are based on a fear that is not necessarily connected to the immediate circumstance, but a more global perspective.
Possibly.
Life is unsafe, and anything could happen, so it's not zero, so therefore, and then fill in the blank, whatever they're there for. It's just an interesting thing when you think about it. It is interesting,
and I really think Jonathan Haidt does dive into that.
Kind of connects to that.
Yeah,
that's
which really, we'll need to read that.
I actually need to read. They don't have the answer.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. So that's good. So next week will be a big deal. That'll be really fun. I think that'll be great.
Oh, it'll be great.
And then, and so emotional health. Also, I wanted to mention in December, we're going to switch gears kind of a lot, and we're going to go more towards really beauty and imagination, and what does it mean to connect with God on that level, beauty and imagination. And we're going to have another event in December, which is an art gallery opening here at King's Crossing, along with some Latour providing some entertainment. So it'll be really a fun thing.
Yes.
So it's good. Very good.
Yes.
Well, once again, we thank you guys for being a part of what we're doing here. We really appreciate you. And remember, if you forget everything else that we've said today, remember that Jesus is Lord. Take care, you guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Gospel Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida. You can find us online at myccs.org.